My boyfriend invited my son and me to a lavish family dinner at his Connecticut estate. It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, his mother slid a 40-page legal trap across the table before the appetizers even arrived. While they were busy insulting my background and demanding I sign away my rights, my 10-year-old son tugged my sleeve. He whispered that my boyfriend's teenage daughter had just slipped something heavy into his coat pocket. I checked it, and my blood ran cold. I quietly moved the item into her designer bag instead. 30 minutes later, the local police kicked the front door open. My name is Stella, 34 years old, and a forensic accountant for a major investment firm. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family who thought they could walk all over you. Trust me, you will want to hear how this dinner ended. The dining room of Bradley's sprawling Connecticut estate smelled of expensive roasted lamb and cheap intentions. The crystal chandelier cast a harsh light on the faces of his family. We had barely taken our seats when Sylvia Bradley's mother reached into her designer tote bag. She did not bring out a gift. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and dropped it onto my porcelain dinner plate. The thud echoed in the quiet room. It was a 40-page prenuptial agreement. Sylvia tapped her manicured fingernail against the cover page. She did not even try to fake a smile. "Sign it right now," Sylvia demanded, her voice dripping with venom. "We need to protect our generational wealth from outsiders before this relationship goes any further." I looked over at Bradley, expecting him to intervene. We had been dating for a year, and he always played the role of the protective, wealthy executive. But right now, he just stared at his wine glass, suddenly fascinated by the red liquid. He shrugged weakly. "You know how my mother is, Stella. It is just a formality to keep the peace. Just sign it so we can eat." Across the table, Bradley's younger sister Audrey let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Audrey was drowning in luxury credit card debt, a fact I knew very well from my line of work, but she played the part of the golden child perfectly. "Well, what do you expect, Bradley?" Audrey sneered, cutting into her meat. "Stella grew up in the foster system. When you invite an orphan to the dinner table, you have to make sure they do not run off with the silver." Next to Audrey sat her husband, Kendrick. He was a brilliant corporate lawyer, a sharp-dressed African-American man who was the actual financial backbone of Audrey's lavish lifestyle. Kendrick did not laugh at his wife's cruel joke. He just locked eyes with me, his expression unreadable, but exhausted, silently observing the circus he was married into. I did not flinch. My childhood in the system taught me how to read predators. I calmly picked up my wine glass, taking a slow sip. "I am a forensic accountant, Sylvia," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I do not sign 40-page contracts between the salad and the main course without reading the fine print." Sylvia's face flushed red. She slammed her hand on the mahogany table. "You will sign it if you want to be part of this family. You came from nothing. My son has an empire to protect. You are not going to sink your teeth into our assets. We know your type. You manipulate your way into a wealthy home, and suddenly you feel entitled to everything we have built." Bradley finally spoke up, but it was not to defend me. "Come on, Stella, do not make a scene. Just borrow a pen from Kendrick and initial the bottom. It is not a big deal." I was about to tell Bradley exactly what he could do with that pen when I felt a small, urgent tug on my sleeve. I looked down. My 10-year-old son Leo was sitting quietly beside me. Leo was incredibly observant, a survival trait he unfortunately inherited from me. He leaned in close, his eyes darting toward the grand foyer. "Mom," Leo whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Madison just went to the coat rack. I saw her." Bradley's 15-year-old daughter Madison had slipped into the hallway. "What did she do, Leo?" I asked softly, keeping my eyes fixed on Sylvia. "She put something heavy into my jacket pocket," Leo breathed. "I saw her sneak it in, and then she ran right back upstairs." I placed my hand over Leo's small fingers, giving them a comforting squeeze. I did not gasp. I did not look toward the dimly lit hallway. I kept my face as calm as a frozen winter lake. "Excuse me for just a brief moment," I said, pushing my heavy dining chair back with a smooth scrape against the polished hardwood floor. Leo spilled a little bit of water on his sleeve earlier. I'm just going to grab his denim jacket and take him to the washroom to clean up quickly. Sylvia rolled her eyes, aggressively muttering something under her breath about a severe lack of proper manners at a formal dinner table. Bradley did not even bother to look up from his bright smartphone screen. I stood up, keeping my posture perfectly straight, and gently guided Leo toward the massive grand foyer. As we walked past the tall mahogany coat rack, I reached out and casually lifted Leo's small blue jacket off the brass hook. The exact moment the heavy fabric settled into my hands, I felt the completely unnatural weight dragging down the right pocket. My stomach tightened into a painful knot, but I forced myself to keep walking normally. We slipped quietly into the guest bathroom, a massive, opulent space entirely covered in cold Italian marble and shiny gold fixtures. I quickly locked the heavy, solid oak door behind us and turned on the sink faucet to full blast to muffle any potential sound. Leo looked up at me with wide, terribly frightened brown eyes. I gave him a quick, exceptionally brave smile, then slowly reached my hand deep into his jacket pocket. My cold fingers brushed against thick, heavy metal and a strangely crinkling plastic bag. I pulled both hidden items out and held them up directly under the bright, glaring vanity lights. The first item was a large men's watch. It was not just any ordinary watch. It was a vintage solid gold Patek Philippe. I recognized it immediately without any hesitation. It was Bradley's late father's absolute most prized heirloom, a rare piece worth easily $200,000. Sylvia had brought it up countless times during past dinners, always obnoxiously bragging about its high auction value and deep historical significance. The second item was a small, clear Ziploc plastic bag. Inside was a fine, dangerous crystalline white powder. I am a professional forensic accountant. I spend my entire adult life analyzing complex corporate fraud tracing, cleverly hidden financial assets, and understanding the precise, ruthless mechanics of white-collar crimes and extreme legal leverage. My highly trained analytical brain instantly processed the terrifying, life-altering mathematical equation they had just built against me. This was definitely not a silly, childish prank. This was a highly calculated, absolutely vicious legal strike against my family. If the local police were called right now and searched my young son's jacket, they would quickly find a stolen $200,000 heirloom. Under strict Connecticut state law, that specific action is considered grand larceny, a very serious Class B felony. But the valuable gold watch was only the shiny bait. The tiny bag of white powder was the actual deadly weapon. Whether it was pure cocaine or deadly fentanyl, possessing that specific amount, with a minor child present, legally elevates the alleged crime to a whole new, terrifying tier of total devastation. The police would immediately arrest me on the spot. But much worse, Child Protective Services would be legally obligated to aggressively take Leo into emergency state custody tonight. They knew exactly what they were planning. They knew I grew up completely alone in the broken foster system. They knew my deepest, most agonizing, terrible fear was my beloved son ever experiencing the cold, dark, highly bureaucratic nightmare of permanent state care. Once I was sitting helplessly in a freezing jail cell, completely frantic and terribly terrified, for Leo Bradley and Sylvia would magically play the heroic saviors. They would generously offer to drop the heavy theft charges and handle the massive bail money. All I would logically have to do in exchange was quickly sign their 40-page prenuptial agreement, or perhaps a new worse contract entirely, one that officially gave them absolute full control over my hard-earned, self-made $4 million trust fund. They desperately needed my money to quickly save their rapidly crumbling financial empire, and they were fully willing to totally destroy my entire life and traumatize my innocent child to get it. Most people would panic. When you are unfairly cornered, you do not cry. You calculate. I stared at myself in the mirror. My expression was ruthlessly focused. I dropped the items into my pocket and knelt down. "We are playing a secret game now," I whispered to Leo. "We are playing a very special secret game right now," I whispered to Leo. "I need you to be completely silent and act like absolutely nothing happened. Can you please do that for me tonight?" Leo nodded his head, his small face serious and trusting. "Good boy," I said softly. I quickly took a clean, damp paper towel and gently wiped a tiny drop of water off his denim jacket sleeve, just in case anyone decided to look too closely at us. Then I unlocked the heavy oak door, and we stepped back out into the grand hallway. The air in the house felt thick with unspoken hostility. As we walked back toward the dining room, my eyes scanned the lavishly decorated space. There, sitting carelessly on the expensive marble console table near the front entrance, was Madison's black Prada handbag. It was unzipped, left wide open, as if she had just tossed it there in a hurry. The opportunity was so incredibly perfect, it almost felt staged. Without missing a single step, I let go of Leo's hand for just one brief second. I reached into my own pocket, pulled out the vintage solid gold watch and the bag of white powder, and dropped them straight into the dark depths of Madison's expensive designer bag. They landed with a soft, inaudible thud against her makeup compacts and leather wallet. I took Leo's hand again and we calmly walked back into the dining room. I pulled out my chair and sat down gracefully, settling Leo back into his seat beside me. The conversation at the table abruptly stopped. Every single angry pair of eyes locked directly onto me. The thick 40-page prenuptial agreement was still sitting exactly where Sylvia had dropped it on my dinner plate. The silence stretched tight across the room, heavy with malicious expectation. "Are we quite finished with the theatrics?" Sylvia asked sharply, her eyes darting between me and the hallway. Her fingers drummed a nervous, erratic rhythm against the edge of the mahogany table. "Just sign the document, Stella. We have a beautiful roasted lamb getting cold, and I simply detest ruined dinners." I reached forward. I did not pick up the pen. Instead, I grabbed the heavy crystal wine decanter sitting in the center of the table. I poured myself a generous glass of deep red Cabernet, taking my absolute time. Then I placed the decanter down, picked up the 40-page legal document with 2 fingers, and casually slid it right back across the table. It stopped inches from Sylvia's plate. "I am not signing that, Sylvia," I said, keeping my voice light and completely unbothered. "In fact, I am not signing anything tonight. I think we should just enjoy the meal. After all, you went through so much trouble to orchestrate this entire evening." Sylvia's jaw tightened dangerously. She glanced down at her diamond-encrusted wristwatch. It was a quick, anxious movement that told me everything I needed to know. She was checking the time because she was expecting a very specific disruption. She looked back up at me, her eyes narrowing with cold fury. "You are making a massive mistake, Stella. You have absolutely no idea what you are dealing with right now." I took a slow sip of my wine. The vintage was excellent, rich, and complex, a stark contrast to the cheap behavior of the people drinking it. "I think I know exactly what I am dealing with," I replied smoothly. Across the table, Bradley was rapidly falling apart. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly sweating profusely. He grabbed his linen napkin and wiped his forehead, refusing to make eye contact with me. He looked terrified, like a man waiting for a bomb to go off. Audrey sneered at me, completely oblivious to the real tension in the room, ready to hurl another insult. Kendrick just watched me intently, a faint glimmer of genuine respect forming in his dark eyes. He sensed that the power dynamic had just shifted, even if he did not yet know how. The room fell into an unbearable, suffocating silence. Sylvia checked her watch again, her breathing growing shallow. The trap was set. They were just waiting for the jaws to snap shut. Then the heavy velvet curtains covering the dining room windows suddenly lit up. Bright flashing beams of aggressive red and blue light sliced through the darkness outside, painting the walls of the dining room in frantic colors. A loud, authoritative siren chirped once, cutting through the quiet suburban neighborhood. Bradley gasped loudly, dropping his fork onto his plate with a loud clatter. Sylvia sat up completely straight, a triumphant, wicked smile finally breaking across her face. Heavy, incredibly violent knocking suddenly pounded against the solid wood of the front door. Before anyone could stand up to answer it, the massive front door was shoved open. Police Chief Higgins marched straight into the grand foyer flanked by two stern deputies. I knew Chief Higgins by reputation. He was a notorious golf buddy of Bradley's late father, attending Sylvia's lavish summer charity galas and turning a blind eye to the family's many indiscretions. Tonight, however, he was playing the role of a hardline enforcer. He stepped into the dining room, his boots thudding against the floor. His hand rested intimidatingly on his thick leather utility belt. "Nobody move," the chief barked, trying to sound authoritative. "We received a highly credible anonymous tip regarding stolen property and the illegal possession of narcotics at this residence." Sylvia launched into her pre-planned theatrical performance. She gasped loudly, bringing her hand up to her chest, as if she might actually faint from the sheer shock of the intrusion. "Officers, this is absolutely outrageous!" Sylvia cried out, her voice trembling with completely fake terror. "We are a respectable family, having a quiet dinner. There must be some kind of terrible mistake." But then right on cue she turned her head and cast a slow, highly suspicious glare directly at me. Although Sylvia added, smoothly lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper, "We do have a guest tonight who comes from a very questionable background. If there is illicit activity happening in my pristine home, I strongly suggest you check the coat rack first. Those items belong to her and her son." Chief Higgins nodded grimly, fully playing along with the orchestrated charade. He signaled to his two deputies with a sharp flick of his wrist. "Search the guest belongings on the coat rack," he ordered loudly. "Leave no stone unturned." The two officers moved toward the grand foyer. I did not stand up. I did not protest. I pulled Leo a little closer to my side, wrapping one arm around his small shoulders. With my free hand, I slowly raised my crystal wine glass to my lips and took another relaxed sip of the rich Cabernet. Bradley watched me, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat, utterly bewildered by my lack of panic. Audrey smirked openly, anticipating my destruction. Kendrick remained perfectly still, observing everything. We could hear the rough sounds of the deputies aggressively tearing through the items on the coat rack. Hangers clattered loudly against the brass stand. Fabric was violently unzipped and slapped against the marble table. Sylvia sat up taller in her expensive dining chair. Her smug, triumphant smile widened across her face. She was practically vibrating with cruel excitement, eagerly waiting for the officers to march back into the room, holding the golden watch and the bag of white powder. She was mentally preparing her horrified gasps and demands for my arrest. The seconds ticked by, heavy with dark anticipation. Then the two deputies walked back into the dining room. Their hands were completely empty. Chief Higgins looked at them expectantly, waiting for the dramatic reveal. "Well," the chief demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "what did you find in the boy's denim jacket?" The taller deputy shook his head, looking slightly embarrassed. "Nothing." "Chief," he replied flatly. "We checked every single pocket, the lining, the sleeves. It is empty. We checked the woman's coat too. There is absolutely nothing illegal out there." The smug smile instantly vanished from Sylvia's face, wiped away as if she had just been slapped across the cheek. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. "What do you mean, nothing?" Sylvia shrieked, dropping her sophisticated upper-class facade. "That is impossible. You must not have looked hard enough. Check the blue denim jacket again. I am telling you, it has to be in there." Her voice cracked with genuine panic. She looked wildly at Bradley, who was gripping the edge of the table tightly. Chief Higgins looked extremely confused. He had clearly been given a specific script to follow, and now the prop was missing. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, my officers know how to conduct a thorough search," Higgins said firmly. "If the items are not in the guest coats, then we have a major problem. We have a judge-signed warrant based on a verified tip. That means the stolen property and narcotics are inside this house somewhere." Higgins scanned the faces of everyone sitting around the table, his expression hardening into real suspicion. "Nobody is leaving this room until we find it. This is no longer a friendly visit. This is an active federal crime scene. I want a full search of every single person here, and I want all personal bags emptied onto this table right now. Nobody is going to play any games." The two deputies stepped forward, their expressions shifting from polite deference to professional severity. They moved straight toward the marble console table in the hallway, where all the women had left their expensive purses upon arriving. I watched with quiet satisfaction as the taller officer grabbed Madison's black Prada handbag. He brought it directly over to the large mahogany dining table right in front of Chief Higgins and Sylvia. "Empty it!" Higgins ordered, his voice tight. He still firmly believed this was just a minor detour in their grand plan to humiliate me. The deputy grabbed the bottom of the designer bag and flipped it upside down over the polished wood. A cascade of teenage necessities tumbled out. A shiny pink lip gloss rolled across the table. A leather wallet slapped against the wood. A pair of expensive sunglasses clattered loudly. And then came the heavy, undeniable thud of solid gold. The vintage Patek Philippe watch hit the table, sliding right to the edge of Sylvia's pristine porcelain dinner plate. Right behind it, the small clear plastic bag filled with fine white powder dropped softly onto the wood landing, directly under the harsh glare of the crystal chandelier. The entire dining room froze in absolute terror. Madison let out a blood-curdling scream of sheer horror. She leaped back from the table, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. "No," Madison shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "That is not mine. I have never seen that before. I swear it is not mine." Sylvia physically recoiled as if the bag of fentanyl was a venomous snake about to strike her face. She loudly gasped for air, her hand shooting up to clutch the thick string of pearls around her neck. Her eyes rolled back slightly and she slumped heavily against her dining chair, looking like she was genuinely about to faint from the massive shock. "Oh my God," Sylvia wheezed, her chest heaving in absolute panic. "What is the meaning of this?" Chief Higgins stood completely paralyzed. The arrogant, authoritative posture he walked in with completely vanished. He stared blankly at the gold watch and the bag of narcotics, his brain desperately trying to process how the evidence ended up in the wrong place. He was supposed to find this in my son's jacket. He was supposed to arrest the poor foster kid, not the wealthy teenage granddaughter of his country club friends. He looked at Bradley, his eyes silently begging for an explanation or a new set of instructions. But Bradley was completely speechless, his mouth hanging open as he stared at the illegal drugs sitting next to his mother's water glass. "Well, Chief Higgins," I said, my voice slicing right through the frantic noise of the room. I remained perfectly seated, my hands resting calmly on my lap. "It looks like your anonymous tip was highly accurate after all. You found the stolen property and the illegal narcotics." Higgins swallowed hard, thick beads of sweat forming on his balding forehead. "Now hold on just a minute," he stammered defensively, stepping back from the table. "There must be a perfectly reasonable explanation for this. This young girl is an honor roll student. She would never be involved in something like this." I stood up slowly, making sure my presence commanded the entire room. "I am not interested in her academic record, Chief," I stated firmly, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "You just declared this an active federal crime scene. You found a Class B felony amount of stolen property and a significant quantity of highly dangerous narcotics in her direct possession. Under Connecticut state law, you are legally obligated to place her under arrest immediately and transport her to the station for booking." Madison started sobbing hysterically, begging her father to save her. "Daddy, please tell them," she cried, grabbing his arm. "Tell them I did not do it." I expected Bradley to shield his daughter. I expected him to step up, play the protective father, and take the blame to save his own flesh and blood. But Bradley was a coward to his absolute core. He looked at the police officers, then at the drugs, and finally his wild, desperate eyes locked onto me. He did not comfort his crying child. He did not ask the police for a moment to call a lawyer. Instead, Bradley suddenly lunged across the space between us. He grabbed my upper arm with a painful, bruising grip. Before anyone could react, he forcefully yanked me away from the dining table. "We need to talk," Bradley hissed furiously through his teeth, completely ignoring his sobbing daughter. "Right now." He dragged me down the hallway, shoved me inside his dark, private study, and firmly locked the heavy door behind us. The heavy brass lock clicked shut, severing us from the chaos in the dining room. The instant we were alone, the charming, affectionate man I had dated for an entire year completely vanished. Bradley did not look like a wealthy, composed executive anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. He spun around and slammed his hands against the thick oak door, trapping me between his body and the wood. His face was red, his breathing ragged and angry. "You need to go out there right now and tell them it was you," Bradley ordered, his voice dropping to a harsh, demanding whisper. "Tell Chief Higgins you put those things in Madison's bag. Tell him you were jealous of her or something. I do not care what excuse you use, Stella, but you have to fix this immediately." I stared at him, feeling a strange sense of absolute clarity. The final piece of the puzzle had just snapped perfectly into place. I slowly lifted my left wrist, pretending to nervously adjust my sleeve. With one subtle tap of my index finger, I activated the voice memo recording app on my Apple Watch. The small red light blinked, capturing every single word of his betrayal. "You want me to confess to possessing a felony amount of fentanyl and stealing a $200,000 watch?" I asked, keeping my tone entirely even, making sure the watch microphone picked up his demands clearly. "You want me to go to a federal prison for a crime your family orchestrated?" Bradley grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. "Do not play dumb with me, Stella. You grew up in the system. You know exactly how to handle the cops and the courts. You have been dealing with state workers your whole life. You know how to survive that kind of environment. Madison is just a 15-year-old minor. She is a straight-A student with a bright future. A drug charge will completely ruin her entire life. She would not last one single day in juvenile detention. You are a grown woman. You can take this hit for us." I did not pull away from his aggressive grip. I wanted him to keep talking. I wanted the recording to capture the true ugly depth of his manipulation. "And what happens to my son Bradley?" I asked coldly. "If I am arrested tonight for grand larceny and drug possession, Child Protective Services will take Leo away before midnight. You know that is my worst nightmare." Bradley waved his hand dismissively, as if losing my child was just a minor inconvenience in his grand master plan. "I will hire the most expensive lawyers in the state," he promised quickly, his eyes darting around the dark room. "I will pay your bail first thing tomorrow morning. I will personally make sure Leo stays with my mother until you get out. We will tell the social workers we are engaged. It will just be a temporary arrangement. You just have to take the fall tonight to get the police out of my house. I love you, Stella. If you love me, you will make this tiny sacrifice for our family." The sheer audacity of his words was almost impressive. He was genuinely trying to convince me that going to prison and losing my only child was a simple favor. He was gaslighting me, using my traumatic childhood as a weapon to protect his spoiled daughter and his arrogant mother. "I am not taking the fall for anyone, Bradley," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing temperature. "I know you put those drugs in my son's jacket. I know you and your mother planned this entire ambush to force me into signing that ridiculous prenuptial agreement so you could steal my trust fund. Your plan failed. Now you have to deal with the consequences of your own actions." Bradley's face contorted with pure rage. He raised his fist, stepping incredibly close to my face. "You arrogant, ungrateful little," he started to scream, abandoning any remaining shred of decency. Before he could finish his vicious threat, loud, violent banging suddenly erupted against the solid oak study door right behind my head. "Open this door right now!" Audrey screeched from the hallway, aggressively pounding her bare fists against the heavy wood. "We do not have time for this nonsense today, Bradley. The police chief is rapidly losing his patience with you. Tell that ungrateful, glorified calculator to get out here and do her job. She absolutely owes us this massive sacrifice to save our reputation. We were extremely generous enough to let an orphan like her sit at our family dinner table, and this is how she repays us. Get out here and confess right now, Stella." I reached past Bradley, my hand grabbing the cold brass handle. I unlocked the heavy oak door and pulled it open. Audrey stumbled forward, almost losing her balance in her expensive designer heels. She glared at me, her face twisted in a nasty, impatient scowl. Bradley pushed past me without saying a single word, leaving me to follow him back into the dining room. The scene waiting for us was pure, unadulterated chaos. Madison was sitting on the plush sofa, sobbing loudly into her hands, while Sylvia rubbed her back, glaring at me as if I was the devil incarnate. The two deputies were standing awkwardly by the marble table, unsure of how to proceed with the wealthy, crying teenager. Chief Higgins looked incredibly relieved to see Bradley and me return. He immediately marched over, his heavy-duty boots thumping against the expensive Persian rug. "Miss, I need to speak with you privately," Higgins demanded, his tone dropping the polite facade he had maintained earlier. He did not wait for my permission. He firmly grabbed my elbow and steered me away from the rest of the family, guiding me into the shadowy alcove near the grand staircase. The loud sobbing of the teenager echoed behind us. Higgins leaned in close. His breath smelled strongly of stale coffee and cheap peppermint. "Listen to me very carefully," he whispered, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "I have known this prestigious family for well over 20 years. I know for an absolute fact that young girl did not bring those illicit narcotics into this house. You are the total outsider here. You are the complete anomaly. I am going to give you one single chance to make this situation easy on everyone. You are going to walk back out there right now and tell my deputies that you accidentally dropped that bag into her expensive purse when you were moving your coats around. You will say you found the gold watch earlier and panicked. If you do not confess to this immediately," Higgins continued, his voice dripping with venomous, unchecked authority, "I am going to formally arrest you for felony child endangerment. I will make a direct telephone call to the emergency hotline for Child Protective Services. I currently have a family court judge on speed dial who owes me several large personal favors. I will personally ensure your little boy is ripped out of this beautiful house tonight and placed directly into emergency state custody. He will sleep in a crowded, highly dangerous group foster home, and you will rot in a freezing county jail cell desperately fighting these felony drug distribution charges." The malicious threat was a direct, violently precise psychological strike at my deepest, darkest childhood trauma. For a fraction of a terrible second, the polished Connecticut mansion completely faded away. I was exactly 7 years old again, standing freezing on a dirty wooden porch, with my meager belongings stuffed into a black trash bag. I vividly remembered waiting for a completely apathetic stranger in a loud state vehicle to legally drive me away to my next temporary living nightmare. I acutely remembered the bitter cold, the aching hunger, and the absolute visceral terror of being completely alone and entirely helpless against the massive government system. Chief Higgins fully expected me to quickly crumble under the immense pressure. He smugly expected the heavy, intimidating weight of his shiny silver badge and his remarkably cruel ultimatum to finally break my stubborn spirit. He desperately wanted streaming tears, frantic, breathless apologies, and my complete, unquestioning submission to his corrupt authority. But the foolish man vastly underestimated the incredibly resilient woman he was actually dealing with tonight. That brief, suffocating flash of childhood terror vanished instantly, completely replaced by a surging, freezing wave of absolute calculating rage. My brown eyes turned practically ice cold. I stared directly into the heavily lined, corrupt face of the local police chief, meticulously committing every single aggressive feature to my permanent memory. I was definitely not a scared, helpless little orphan anymore. I was a highly educated, ruthlessly efficient financial weapon, and this arrogant officer had just foolishly stepped directly onto my carefully prepared battlefield. I felt a profound sense of dangerous calm wash over my entire tense body. I slowly took a very deep, measured breath, silently preparing to completely dismantle his pathetic illegal threats with my secretly recorded audio evidence. I confidently opened my mouth to finally speak out. But before I could utter a single defensive syllable to the corrupt officer, a remarkably deep, powerfully commanding voice suddenly echoed across the quiet dining room. Kendrick, the incredibly quiet African-American brother-in-law, who had not spoken once all evening, slowly stood up from his chair, calmly and deliberately, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. Kendrick walked across the dining room with the quiet, terrifying confidence of a predator entering a cage full of frightened mice. He stepped directly between me and Chief Higgins, completely blocking the corrupt officer from my personal space. Chief Higgins. Kendrick began, his voice smooth but incredibly sharp. I believe you just committed a textbook violation of Connecticut General Statutes Section 53-192. That is the legal definition of coercion. You also clearly threatened to weaponize a state child welfare agency to file a demonstrably false report of child endangerment. That falls perfectly under extortion, under the color of official right. He adjusted his expensive silk tie, looking down at the shorter, sweating police officer. I am quite certain the State Ethics Board, not to mention the Federal Bureau of Investigation, would be highly interested in your explicit offer to ignore felony drug possession in exchange for a false confession to protect your wealthy country club friends. Higgins puffed out his chest, desperately trying to regain his lost authority. Now listen here, Kendrick. The chief stammered loudly, his face turning red. You better back off right now. This is active police business. You have absolutely no legal right to interfere with my ongoing criminal investigation inside this house. Kendrick smiled. It was not a warm expression. Actually, Chief Higgins, I have every legal right, Kendrick replied smoothly. I am a fully licensed attorney in the state of Connecticut. Furthermore, I am officially declaring myself as Stella's legal counsel effective immediately. Any further communication you wish to have with my client will go directly through me in a recorded deposition room with a certified court reporter present. If you attempt to contact Child Protective Services tonight, I will personally file a massive federal civil rights lawsuit against you and your entire police department before the sun comes up tomorrow morning. I will make absolutely sure your pension is completely frozen and your shiny silver badge is permanently revoked. Higgins physically stepped back, his face turning an unhealthy shade of pale gray. He knew Kendrick was definitely not bluffing. Kendrick was widely known as a legal shark in the corporate world, a man who destroyed opposing counsel for breakfast. Sylvia suddenly slammed her hands heavily onto the polished mahogany dining table, unable to contain her arrogant, classist fury any longer. Kendrick, how dare you speak to the local police chief that way in my own home? She screeched, her voice incredibly shrill and highly demanding. You need to remember exactly who you are and know your place in this family. You are Audrey's husband. You are supposed to fiercely protect our private interests, not aggressively defend some greedy outsider who is actively trying to ruin my precious teenage granddaughter. Kendrick slowly turned his head to look directly at his furious mother-in-law. The silence that quickly followed his movement was incredibly heavy and deeply dangerous. My place. Sylvia, Kendrick asked, his tone absolutely freezing the remaining oxygen in the room. My place is as a senior managing partner at the most ruthless corporate law firm in this entire state. My place is the man who single-handedly pays for your daughter's astronomical credit card bills and entirely funds your incredibly lavish, completely fake upper-class lifestyle. My place is right here, standing firmly between a highly corrupt justice system and an innocent, hardworking mother. So I strongly suggest you sit down and keep your mouth entirely shut before I decide to completely stop paying for this ridiculous, expensive charade. Audrey gasped loudly, completely mortified by her husband's brutal honesty in front of the police. Bradley, seeing his mother publicly humiliated, and his entire master plan rapidly unraveling before his eyes, completely lost whatever tiny fraction of control he still possessed. He stormed aggressively across the carpeted room, his fists tightly clenched at his sides, foolishly trying to intimidate the brilliant lawyer. You listen to me right now, Kendrick, Bradley yelled aggressively, getting directly into Kendrick's calm face. You work for this family. You do not ever get to come into my house and threaten my mother or disrespect my police chief. You are going to back off right this second, or I will personally make sure you lose absolutely everything you have worked for. Kendrick did not flinch. He did not step back. He simply looked at Bradley with absolute pity and deep disgust. He reached up and easily brushed Bradley's aggressive hand off his tailored suit shoulder, as if casually swatting away a minor annoying insect. "Are you absolutely sure you want to threaten me tonight?" Bradley Kendrick asked softly, his deep voice carrying a dangerous, razor-sharp edge. "Because we can definitely discuss the $10 million missing from your corporate payroll." The color instantly drained from Bradley's face. The sudden mention of the $10 million missing from his corporate payroll hit him like a heavy physical blow to the stomach. He stumbled backward, his false bravado entirely shattering under Kendrick's intense, unyielding gaze. Bradley opened his mouth to argue, to loudly deny the massive financial accusation, but absolutely no words came out. He just stared at his brilliant brother-in-law in absolute terrified silence. Sylvia watched her son crumble. Her sharp, calculating mind desperately raced to find a brand new way out of this rapidly escalating legal disaster. She quickly realized that physically intimidating me was no longer a viable option tonight. Kendrick had effectively built an impenetrable legal wall around me, and Chief Higgins was already looking nervously toward the front door, clearly regretting his corrupt involvement in this massive mess. The trap they had carefully laid for me had completely failed. If they did not find a new scapegoat immediately, the police chief would be forced to arrest Bradley to desperately save his own sinking career. Sylvia suddenly let out a loud, tragic sigh. She pressed her right hand against her forehead, completely changing her demeanor from an aggressive tyrant to a heartbroken, grieving grandmother. "Chief Higgins." Sylvia said, her voice shaking with incredibly fake sorrow. "I am so incredibly ashamed right now. We tried desperately to keep this a private family matter, but I see now that we can no longer hide the ugly truth from the law." Higgins looked at her cautiously, highly wary of another manipulative trick. "What truth, Sylvia?" he asked firmly. Sylvia slowly turned her head and pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at her sobbing teenage granddaughter. "Madison is deeply troubled," Sylvia declared, her voice echoing loudly across the silent dining room. "She has been struggling with severe psychological issues for the past year. She has fallen in with a terrible crowd at her expensive private school. She has a very serious drug addiction." Madison stopped crying for a fraction of a second, her red, swollen eyes widening in absolute shock. She stared at her grandmother, completely unable to comprehend the massive betrayal unfolding right in front of her. Bradley immediately caught on to his mother's ruthless pivot. He swallowed his pride and eagerly threw his own teenage daughter directly under the heavy bus to save his pathetic skin. "Yes," Bradley jumped in, his voice taking on a fake, intensely sorrowful tone. "It breaks my heart to admit this out loud. We have been sending her to expensive therapists, but nothing is working. She must have stolen my late father's gold watch to sell it on the street. She must have brought those terrible narcotics into this house herself. She probably tried to hide them in Leo's jacket when the police suddenly showed up at the front door." The sheer level of absolute cowardice was staggering to witness. These wealthy, supposedly respectable people were completely willing to send a 15-year-old girl to a juvenile detention center and brand her a felony drug addict just to safely avoid facing the severe legal consequences of their own fraudulent actions. "No!" Madison shrieked, her voice tearing painfully through the room. She jumped off the plush sofa, her hands clenched into tight fists. "Grandma, how could you say that, Dad? Why are you lying to them? I do not do drugs. I have never touched drugs in my entire life. You know that." Madison turned frantically toward Chief Higgins, thick tears streaming rapidly down her pale cheeks. "Please, you have to believe me," the teenager pleaded desperately. "I did not steal that watch. I did not buy those drugs anywhere. My dad gave them to me. He literally handed me that plastic baggie in the front hallway exactly 10 minutes before dinner started." Bradley's face twisted with ugly, desperate panic. "Shut your mouth right now, Madison," he yelled aggressively, stepping toward his daughter with a highly threatening posture. "Stop making up these ridiculous lies. You are completely out of control. You need serious medical help." "He gave it to me," Madison screamed even louder, pointing an accusing finger directly at her furious father. He told me to sneak over to the coat rack and put the heavy bag into Leo's blue jacket. He said it was a special secret plan to get rid of Stella forever. He said if I did exactly what he asked tonight, he would buy me the brand new car I wanted for my 16th birthday. Bradley scoffed loudly, letting out a harsh fake laugh. Officer, please completely ignore her crazy, desperate stories. She is a total and complete liar, Bradley said. I calmly reached down, slowly opening my leather briefcase to finally pull out my sleek silver iPad. I placed the iPad flat against my palm and smoothly tapped the screen a few times. The massive 80-inch smart television mounted above the marble fireplace instantly chimed, signaling a successful wireless connection. Every eye in the room darted away from the sobbing teenager and locked onto the giant glowing screen. Bradley abruptly stopped laughing. His face went completely slack as he recognized the familiar interface of his own highly expensive home security system displaying across the television. "You see, Chief Higgins?" I began, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "I am a forensic accountant. My entire job revolves around finding things that wealthy, arrogant people desperately want to keep hidden. When I started noticing some glaring inconsistencies in Bradley's personal spending habits last week, I decided to do a little preliminary digging. That included quietly accessing the internal network of this very house to see exactly who was coming and going. I was originally looking for evidence of hidden bank statements or secret meetings with bankruptcy lawyers. Instead, I recorded something much more sinister. I pressed the play button on my tablet. The giant screen flickered to life, showing a crystal-clear, high-definition feed from the hidden camera located in the front hallway. The timestamp in the corner proved the recording was captured exactly 10 minutes before our dinner started. The digital video showed Bradley pulling his daughter into the corner by the coat rack. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out the small plastic bag of white powder. The audio was incredibly crisp, echoing loudly through the silent dining room. "Listen to me, Madison," the digital version of Bradley commanded on the screen. "Just put it in the brat's coat. Make sure it goes deep into the pocket so it does not fall out early." On the screen, Madison looked terrified. "Dad, what is that?" she asked, shrinking away from the baggie. "I do not want to touch that." "Just do exactly what I am telling you," Bradley hissed on the video, violently shoving the bag into her hands. "We will get her locked up tonight. We will easily take emergency custody of the kid. Once we have the boy, we can force her to sign over her entire trust fund to get him back. We will use her money to completely save the company. If you do not do this right now, we are going to lose this house, your car, and everything else. Do you understand me?" The video ended abruptly, freezing on Bradley's desperate, vicious face. The silence that followed in the real dining room was absolutely deafening. Madison sobbed harder, burying her face in her hands. She had been completely vindicated, but the undeniable proof of her own father's staggering betrayal was destroying her. Sylvia sat frozen in her expensive chair, her mouth hanging wide open. Her carefully constructed facade of upper-class superiority was completely shattered. She looked like a pathetic, terrified old woman who finally realized her entire world was rapidly collapsing around her. Audrey stared at the blank television screen, completely speechless. For once in her entitled life, she had absolutely nothing cruel or mocking to say. Kendrick just slowly shook his head, looking at his brother-in-law with a mixture of intense disgust and deep professional pity. Bradley looked like he was going to vomit. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of the mahogany table. He looked frantically at the police officers, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "That is fake!" Bradley stammered weakly, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "That has to be an artificial intelligence fabrication." She manipulated the video. Chief Higgins did not look at Bradley. He did not look at Sylvia. He took a massive, heavy step backward, physically distancing himself from the wealthy family he had protected for decades. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and incredibly old. Higgins was a corrupt cop, but he was not a stupid man. He instantly recognized the terrifying magnitude of the situation. This was no longer a simple favor to a rich friend. This was a highly documented federal conspiracy involving narcotics extortion, grand larceny, and child endangerment. And worse, he had just been caught on my Apple Watch threatening to actively participate in the cover-up. He had threatened to illegally weaponize Child Protective Services to force a false confession. The local police chief realized he was standing right in the middle of a massive federal crime scene, and the woman holding the evidence was completely untouchable. He slowly lowered his hand away from his utility belt, swallowing hard as he looked directly at Kendrick, the high-powered corporate attorney who was already mentally drafting the federal indictments tonight. Sylvia suddenly realized that the immense protective shield of local law enforcement had entirely collapsed around her. Her eyes darted frantically around the lavish dining room, desperately searching for a brand new angle to regain control. When she looked at my calm face, her panic instantly transformed into a blinding, irrational fury. She pointed a trembling, diamond-adorned finger directly at my chest. "That video is entirely inadmissible!" Sylvia shrieked, her voice echoing harshly against the crystal chandelier above us. "You hacked into my private home security network. That is illegal wiretapping. You are a cyber criminal. I am the matriarch of this family, and this is my private property. I want you and your little brat out of my house right this second. Get out. Get out of my house before I have you arrested for trespassing." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I certainly did not move toward the grand foyer to collect our coats. Instead, I calmly reached down to the floor next to my dining chair. I picked up my heavy, dark leather briefcase and placed it squarely onto the polished mahogany dining table, right next to the bag of fentanyl and the stolen gold watch. The sharp, metallic click of the brass latches opening echoed loudly, completely cutting through Sylvia's loud, hysterical screaming. "You seem to have a very fundamental misunderstanding of what it is I actually do for a living, Sylvia," I said, keeping my tone incredibly level and highly professional. "I am not just a standard corporate accountant who balances spreadsheets and files quarterly taxes. I work for one of the most aggressive private equity firms on the East Coast. My specific division specializes in distressed assets and corporate liquidations. We find companies that are drowning in toxic debt, we buy out their outstanding loans, and then we completely dismantle them for parts." I reached into the dark interior of my leather briefcase. I pulled out a massive, incredibly thick stack of official bank documents bound by thick rubber bands. I raised the heavy stack in the air for a brief second so everyone in the room could see the bright red, highly confidential banking stamps on the front page. Then I violently slapped the entire stack down onto the dining table. The loud smack sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Bradley physically jumped backward, his eyes locked onto the thick stack of papers, with absolute pure terror. His knees buckled slightly, forcing him to heavily grip the edge of the dining table. He knew exactly what those documents were. "Your son has spent the last entire year playing the role of a highly successful wealthy tech billionaire," I announced to the room, my voice carrying a sharp, completely unforgiving edge. "He drives a leased luxury sports car, he wears imported Italian suits, and he constantly brags about his massive corporate expansion plans. He desperately wanted everyone, especially me, to believe he was sitting on top of an incredibly lucrative financial empire. But numbers absolutely never lie, Sylvia." I slid the top document off the stack and pushed it across the smooth wood toward her. It was a certified financial summary from a major federal bankruptcy court. "Bradley is not a billionaire." I continued, my words hitting them like physical blows. "He is not even a millionaire. His heavily publicized technology company has been completely bankrupt for the last 6 months. He has secretly laid off his entire engineering staff. He has fraudulently defaulted on 4 separate massive commercial loans. He has been aggressively shifting money around in a highly illegal shell game just to keep the lights on in his rented office space." Sylvia stared at the official court document, her mouth opening and closing silently. Her eyes quickly scanned the highlighted numbers, her face draining of all remaining color. "And that is not even the worst part," I said, leaning forward slightly to make sure my words penetrated her thick skull. Your son has desperately leveraged every single asset this family owns. He completely drained his daughter's college fund. He quietly mortgaged the family vacation home. And he is currently drowning in exactly $15 million of highly toxic, unforgivable corporate debt. The silence in the dining room was completely suffocating. The massive illusion of their incredible generational wealth had just been entirely shattered. Bradley was absolutely ruined, and his family finally understood exactly why they needed my $4 million trust fund so desperately tonight. They did not invite me here to welcome me into their prestigious family. They invited me here to become their permanent financial hostage. They arranged this incredibly elaborate trap to completely strip away my independence. They failed to realize they had invited a highly trained corporate assassin to their table. Audrey broke the suffocating silence with a shrill, completely hysterical laugh. She shook her head violently, her perfectly styled hair falling messily across her face. She slammed her hand flat against the mahogany table, glaring at me with absolute unhinged hatred. "That is a complete and utter lie," Audrey screamed, her voice cracking under the intense emotional strain. "My brother is a wildly successful entrepreneur. You printed those fake documents just to publicly humiliate us because you are incredibly jealous of our perfect family. You are nothing but a pathetic lying orphan who wants to destroy everything we have built." Audrey frantically spun around to face her husband, her eyes wide and deeply desperate. "Kendrick, do something right now," she commanded, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "You are a senior partner at the most powerful corporate law firm here. I want you to immediately draft a massive federal lawsuit against her. I want you to sue her for extreme defamation, severe emotional distress, and criminal forgery. I want you to completely bankrupt her so she spends the rest of her miserable life living on the street. Use every single legal connection you have to absolutely crush her tonight. You promise to always protect me and my family. Now do your job." Kendrick did not move a single muscle. He did not reach for his phone to call his legal team. He did not step forward to defend his frantic wife. He simply stood there staring at Audrey with a look of such profound, icy disgust that it made my own blood run cold. It was the absolute look of a highly intelligent man who had finally reached his absolute breaking point after years of quiet, suffocating disrespect. Kendrick slowly reached his large hand inside his tailored suit jacket. He did not pull out a legal notepad. Instead, he pulled out a thick, unmarked brown manila envelope. He held it between his fingers for a brief, tense moment before casually tossing it onto the dining table. It landed right next to my stack of federal bankruptcy documents, the stolen gold watch, and the deadly bag of narcotics. "I am not drafting any lawsuits against Stella tonight," Audrey Kendrick said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying absolute finality. "I am not protecting your brother, and I am certainly not protecting you anymore. I highly suggest you open that brown envelope." Audrey stared at the brown envelope as if it were a live grenade. Her hands shook violently as she slowly reached out and pulled the thick stack of legal papers from inside. The bold black letters printed clearly across the top of the very first page were impossible to misread. They were officially stamped court-approved divorce papers. Audrey gasped sharply, the papers slipping from her trembling fingers and scattering messily across the expensive porcelain plates. "Kendrick, what is this?" she whimpered, her aggressive, entitled demeanor vanishing in an instant. "You cannot do this to me. We are legally married. I am your wife. You stopped being my wife the moment you decided to treat my hard-earned income like your own personal family slush fund," Kendrick replied coldly, stepping away from her. "Did you honestly believe I was completely blind, Audrey? I am a forensic corporate lawyer. I track missing millions for massive international conglomerates. Did you really think I would not notice when you started secretly siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars out of our joint investment accounts to desperately keep your brother's fraudulent company afloat?" Bradley flinched, taking another step backward until his back hit the wall. He knew the absolute truth was finally out. "I have known about your massive secret wire transfers to Bradley for the last 6 months," Kendrick continued, his voice echoing loudly in the silent room. I watched you deliberately drain our personal savings. I watched you max out 3 separate luxury credit cards in my name just to pay the interest on his toxic commercial loans. You stole from me to protect a man who just tried to frame an innocent mother for a federal narcotics crime. Audrey began to sob hysterically, reaching her hands out toward Kendrick in a plea. Please, Kendrick, she begged loudly. I had to help him. He is my brother. We can fix this. Just give me another chance. I will pay you back every single cent. You will not be paying anything back, Audrey. Kendrick said, his expression completely devoid of any remaining sympathy. Because as of 9 this exact morning, I have legally frozen every single joint bank account we share. I have permanently canceled every credit card with your name on it. I have officially changed the locks on our downtown penthouse. You are completely broke. You are officially penniless without my money. Audrey collapsed into her dining chair, burying her face in her hands, as loud, uncontrollable sobs racked her entire body. The devastating reality of her completely ruined financial life crashed down upon her in a matter of seconds. Kendrick did not offer her a single word of comfort. He simply buttoned his suit jacket and took a calculated step back, completely distancing himself from the toxic wreckage of her family. Bradley watched his sister shatter his own mind, racing frantically to find any possible escape route. He knew Chief Higgins was moments away from formally placing him under arrest. He had no company, no hidden cash reserves, and now he had absolutely no wealthy brother-in-law to bail him out of a freezing county jail cell tonight. Desperation makes arrogant men do incredibly stupid things. Bradley's wild eyes suddenly darted away from Kendrick and locked onto the solid gold vintage Patek Philippe watch resting on the mahogany table right next to the bag of fentanyl. It was a rare, highly coveted timepiece, easily worth $200,000 on the open market or at a high-end pawn shop. It was his absolute last remaining lifeline in this massive disaster. Bradley suddenly lunged forward, his hand snatching the heavy gold watch off the table before anyone could stop him. He clutched it tightly against his chest, turning his desperate face toward the police chief. "Listen to me," Higgins, Bradley pleaded, his voice cracking with intense, frantic energy. "We can still fix this entire misunderstanding. I am deeply sorry for the confusion tonight. I was under a lot of stress, but this watch legally belongs to me. It was my late father's most prized possession. It is a family heirloom. I can easily sell this tomorrow morning. I will use the money to post my bail and hire a top defense attorney. Just let me walk out of here with my watch, and I will peacefully come down to the station with you." I stared at Bradley, clutching that shiny gold watch like a drowning man holding onto a tiny piece of driftwood. For the first time all evening, I genuinely smiled. It was not a warm or comforting expression. I threw my head back and let out a sharp, completely unbothered laugh that echoed brightly off the crystal chandelier above us. My laughter completely unnerved him. Bradley stopped talking, glaring at me with a mixture of raw hatred and deep, creeping confusion. "Put the watch back on the table, Bradley," I instructed him, my voice dripping with absolute icy authority. "That does not belong to you anymore." Bradley scoffed loudly, gripping the heavy timepiece even tighter. "You are insane, Stella. This has been in my family for 3 generations. It is my legal property." I reached into my dark leather briefcase one more time and pulled out a single sheet of crisp white paper. It featured the prominent, highly official seal of a major federal banking institution. I casually slid the document across the smooth wood, stopping it directly in front of Police Chief Higgins. "Read the highlighted section, Chief," I suggested calmly. Higgins leaned forward, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. I watched his face turn an even lighter shade of pale gray. "You see, Bradley?" I explained, pacing slowly behind my dining chair. "When you secretly took out that massive commercial loan 6 months ago to desperately save your failing tech company, the bank required significant collateral. You did not have any actual liquid assets left. So you legally pledged your late father's vintage Patek Philippe watch against the loan. You signed a binding federal contract stating the watch belonged to the bank until the multi-million-dollar debt was completely paid off in full." I pointed directly at the heavy gold watch in Bradley's sweating hand. Read the serial number engraved on the back casing, Bradley. It perfectly matches the Federal Collateral Registry on that legal document, which means you do not own that watch. A federal banking institution owns that watch. Bradley looked down at his hand, his mouth hanging open in absolute horror. He was holding a ticking legal time bomb. And here is the absolute best part, I continued, my voice carrying a lethal, precise edge. By actively hiding a heavily leveraged federal asset in your daughter's purse and deliberately attempting to use it to file a false police report for stolen property, you did not just commit state-level grand larceny. You have officially committed severe federal bank fraud. You just attempted to illegally pawn federal collateral to post bail for a narcotics charge. That carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Bradley dropped the heavy gold watch as if it had suddenly caught on fire. Bradley dropped the heavy gold watch as if it had suddenly caught on fire. It hit the polished mahogany table with a sickening clatter, sliding to rest right against the small plastic bag of fentanyl. Chief Higgins stared at the two items, the horrific reality of his situation fully crashing down upon him. He was a corrupt local cop who occasionally looked the other way for his wealthy country club friends, but he was absolutely not willing to get tangled up in a massive federal bank fraud investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not care about local golf buddies. They care about heavily leveraged banking assets and interstate narcotics conspiracies. Higgins knew his entire career, his lucrative pension, and his own personal freedom were actively evaporating into thin air with every single second he remained standing in this dining room without taking immediate, decisive action. Higgins reached down to his thick leather utility belt. The sharp, unmistakable metallic rattle of heavy steel handcuffs being unclasped echoed loudly through the silent room. Both of his deputies immediately mirrored his actions, their hands dropping to their own restraints, finally realizing that the wealthy tech executive was the actual criminal target tonight. Bradley Higgins barked, his voice completely devoid of any previous friendly warmth. Place both of your hands flat on the table right now. You are officially under arrest. Bradley looked wildly around the room. He saw the cold, unforgiving faces of the police officers. He saw his sister Audrey sobbing uncontrollably in her chair, completely ruined. He saw his teenage daughter Madison staring at him with absolute shattered disgust. The overwhelming pressure finally broke his fragile, cowardly mind. He let out a pathetic, high-pitched noise, spun around, and aggressively bolted toward the grand hallway, desperately attempting to escape through the massive front door. He did not even make it 5 steps. Kendrick, who had been quietly standing near the archway, casually stepped directly into Bradley's frantic path. Kendrick did not throw a punch or tackle him to the floor. The brilliant corporate lawyer simply planted his feet firmly, crossing his arms over his tailored suit jacket, turning his broad shoulders into an immovable solid brick wall. Bradley slammed hard into Kendrick, bouncing off him and crashing heavily onto the expensive Persian rug. "Sit down and stay down," Bradley Kendrick commanded, his deep voice radiating absolute authority. "Running from a federal felony charge will only guarantee you spend the rest of your miserable life in a maximum security prison." The two deputies rushed forward, grabbing Bradley by his expensive Italian suit jacket and roughly hauling him up from the floor. They slammed him forcefully against the dining room wall, pulling his arms tightly behind his back. The cold steel handcuffs clicked loudly, locking securely around his wrists. "Bradley, you are under arrest for the illegal possession of Class B narcotics, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, and felony child endangerment." Chief Higgins recited, his voice steady and highly professional now that he was desperately trying to save his own skin. "And based on the documented evidence presented here tonight, I will personally be contacting the federal authorities tomorrow morning to transfer your custody for severe bank fraud and the illegal concealment of federal collateral." Bradley began to openly weep, his face pressed uncomfortably against the expensive wallpaper. He pleaded with the officers, begging them to listen to reason, offering them money he absolutely no longer possessed. They completely ignored his pathetic cries, firmly dragging him away from the dining room and out into the front foyer. As her golden son was forcibly hauled out of the room in handcuffs, Sylvia completely shattered. The arrogant, highly demanding matriarch of the prestigious family simply ceased to exist. She let out a loud, agonizing wail, completely abandoning all of her carefully constructed upper-class dignity. Her legs gave out from underneath her and she collapsed heavily onto the hard, hardwood floor. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the expensive silk fabric of her designer dress catching on the table edge. She stopped directly at my feet, her hands reaching out to frantically grasp the hem of my coat. Tears streamed rapidly down her heavily powdered face, completely ruining her perfect makeup. "Stella." "Please," Sylvia begged, her voice a desperate, incredibly pathetic whimper. "I am so incredibly sorry. We were so incredibly wrong. Please do not let them take my son away to federal prison. He will absolutely not survive in there. You are a brilliant accountant. You have massive connections. You can fix this financial mess. I will do absolutely anything you want. I will sign any legal document you put in front of me. Just tell me what you need me to do. Please have mercy on our family tonight." I looked down at the woman kneeling on the expensive hardwood floor. Sylvia, the proud, untouchable matriarch of this Connecticut dynasty, was completely broken. Her expensive designer gown was wrinkled. Her diamond necklace hung crookedly against her chest, and her perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess. The sheer desperation in her tear-filled eyes was genuinely pathetic. Just an hour ago, she was sitting comfortably at the head of that mahogany dining table, viciously demanding that I sign away my entire future. Now she was literally crawling at my feet, begging me to magically save her from the devastating consequences of her own horrific actions. "Please, Stella." Sylvia sobbed, her hands clutching the bottom of my coat even tighter. "You have the financial power to stop all of this. Your investment firm can easily buy out his toxic commercial loans. You can completely restructure the debt. You can save our entire company and preserve our family name. This is our generational legacy we are talking about. You cannot just let an entire legacy be destroyed in one single night. I am begging you to show us some grace." I did not reach down to help her up. I simply took a slow, deliberate step backward, forcing her trembling hands to let go of my coat. I looked around the lavish dining room. I looked at the crystal chandelier, the expensive Persian rug, and the remaining porcelain dinner plates sitting on the mahogany table. Everything in this massive house was a carefully constructed lie. "Generational legacy, Sylvia." I repeated, my voice dropping to a harsh, freezing whisper that echoed clearly in the quiet room. "You keep throwing those words around as if they somehow make you completely untouchable. You honestly believe that your family name and your country club memberships give you the absolute right to destroy anyone who gets in your way. But your precious legacy is nothing but a massive, glittering illusion. It is entirely built on aggressive corporate fraud, chronic unpaid debts, and the cowardly exploitation of innocent people." I slowly walked back over to my open leather briefcase resting on the dining table. I could feel every single eye in the room watching my every move. Audrey was still crying softly in her chair. Madison was sitting completely frozen on the sofa, still processing the traumatic betrayal of her own father. Kendrick stood quietly near the hallway, his arms crossed, watching the final destruction of the arrogant family he had endured for years. "You called me an orphan tonight, Sylvia," I said, turning back to face the kneeling woman. "You said I was a greedy outsider who came from absolutely nothing. You were terrified that I was going to manipulate my way into your wealthy home and steal your precious assets. But the absolute truth is that I am the only person in this entire room who actually earned every single dollar in my bank account. I built my career through relentless hard work and strict financial discipline. I did not inherit a fake empire, and I certainly did not try to frame a 15-year-old girl for a federal narcotics crime just to pay off a bank loan." Sylvia covered her face with her hands, letting out another loud, agonizing wail. "We were desperate," she cried out weakly, her voice muffled by her shaking fingers. "We did not know what else to do. We were going to lose absolutely everything we had. You were always going to lose everything, Sylvia, I replied coldly, showing absolutely zero sympathy for her pathetic tears. Because you never actually owned any of it to begin with. You borrowed millions of dollars you could never repay, and you arrogantly assumed the rules did not apply to your prestigious family. You thought you could simply crush a former foster child and steal my trust fund to quietly cover your massive financial crimes. But you picked the absolute wrong woman to mess with tonight. I reached my hand deep into the very bottom of my dark leather briefcase. I bypassed the thick stacks of bankruptcy files and the corporate liquidation summaries. My fingers closed around one final, incredibly important legal document. It was a single sheet of heavy cardstock paper securely sealed inside a clear plastic protective folder. I pulled the document out and held it up directly under the bright light of the crystal chandelier. The bright red, highly official seal of the state Supreme Court was clearly visible at the top of the page. I am not buying your bankrupt company, Sylvia, I stated firmly, stepping forward to hand her the heavy file. My investment firm did not just purchase your toxic commercial debt, we also bought the defaulted mortgage on this property. This is your immediate foreclosure notice. Sylvia stared blankly at the heavy cardstock paper in her trembling hands. The bold red letters at the top of the page seemed to burn directly into her retinas. She shook her head in slow, desperate denial. This cannot be real, Sylvia whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own rapid breathing. You cannot just take my home. We have lived in this estate for over 40 years. You have to give us 30 days' notice. There are strict tenant laws in Connecticut. You cannot just throw us out into the cold street tonight. I stepped back, buttoning my coat with calm, deliberate movements. Under normal financial circumstances, you would be absolutely correct, Sylvia, I explained, making sure every single word was crystal clear. When a bank forecloses on a residential property, the previous owners are typically granted a standard 30-day eviction period to safely arrange new living accommodations. My firm officially finalized the purchase of your deeply defaulted mortgages yesterday afternoon. I fully intended to simply hand you the standard notice tonight and walk away. But your son drastically changed the legal parameters of this foreclosure when he decided to bring highly illegal narcotics into my newly acquired property. I gestured broadly around the lavish dining room, pointing toward the heavy mahogany table where the police deputies had just confiscated the bag of fentanyl. By actively using this specific residential property to orchestrate a federal drug conspiracy, and by forcing local law enforcement to conduct a felony drug bust right here in the dining room, you have triggered a severe emergency eviction clause. The state laws you are desperately trying to hide behind completely vanish when the property is legally declared an active crime scene due to the reckless actions of the current occupants. Sylvia frantically looked up at Chief Higgins, silently begging him to intervene and protect her from this brutal legal reality. Chief, please tell her she is wrong, Sylvia cried out. She cannot do this. You have to stop her. Chief Higgins completely refused to make eye contact with the desperate matriarch. He adjusted his heavy utility belt and cleared his throat awkwardly. I am sorry. Sylvia Higgins said, his voice completely devoid of any sympathy. She is absolutely right. Because a Class B felony arrest was just made on these exact premises, the legal property owner has the absolute right to enact an immediate emergency eviction to protect their financial asset from further criminal liability. My officers and I are legally obligated to enforce her eviction order tonight. Audrey let out a loud, piercing scream from her dining chair. You are a complete monster, Stella, she shrieked, tears ruining her expensive mascara. Where are we supposed to go? We have absolutely no money. My husband just completely froze all of my bank accounts. We do not have anywhere else to stay. You cannot just throw your own family out into the freezing winter night. I turned my head and looked directly at the spoiled, entitled woman. I am not your family, Audrey, I reminded her coldly. You made that incredibly clear the moment I walked through the front door tonight. You called me a pathetic orphan. You called me a glorified calculator. You laughed while your mother tried to force me into signing a highly abusive contract. Now you get to experience exactly what it feels like to have absolutely nothing. Kendrick stepped away from the grand hallway, picking up his expensive leather briefcase from the floor. He looked at his hysterical wife one last time. "You better start packing," Audrey Kendrick advised her, his voice perfectly calm and completely detached. "The legal documentation is ironclad. I highly suggest you do not make this any worse for yourself by actively resisting a lawful eviction order in front of the local police." I raised my left wrist and deliberately tapped the glowing face of my Apple Watch. The bright digital numbers illuminated the dark room. "It is currently 8:15 in the evening," I announced, projecting my voice so it reached every single corner of the house. "I am going to be incredibly generous tonight. I am going to give you exactly 1 hour to pack your personal belongings and completely vacate my property. At exactly 9:15, the local police deputies will physically escort anyone remaining inside this house directly out the front door. I highly suggest you stop crying and start packing your bags. You have collected a massive amount of expensive material items over the decades, Sylvia. Whatever you absolutely fail to quickly pack before the strict deadline officially expires will immediately become the permanent legal property of my investment firm. Do not waste another second staring at me. The countdown clock is officially ticking down right this moment. Do not waste another second staring at me. The countdown clock is officially ticking down right this moment." The absolute reality of my words finally broke whatever fragile thread of sanity Audrey still possessed. She let out a furious scream. "You ruined my entire life!" Audrey shrieked, kicking her chair away. She charged across the room, her hands curled into claws aiming straight for my face. I did not flinch. Kendrick moved with lightning speed. He stepped into her path, raising his forearm to block her assault. He caught her by the shoulders, halting her violent momentum in an instant. "Let me go!" Audrey screamed, thrashing against his grip. "She deserves to pay. She deserves to be punished." Kendrick did not raise his voice, but the freezing intensity of his tone instantly silenced her hysterical screaming. "I highly advise you to stop moving right now," Audrey Kendrick commanded, giving her shoulders a firm, grounding shake. "Think very carefully about what you are trying to do. Stella is now the primary reporting witness in a massive federal bank fraud and narcotics investigation involving your brother. If you manage to lay a single finger on her tonight, you will not just be facing a simple assault charge. You will be formally charged with assaulting a federal witness and attempting to intimidate a victim. That carries a mandatory prison sentence. Do you honestly want to spend the next 5 years sitting in a freezing cell directly next to Bradley?" Audrey stopped thrashing. The violent energy completely drained from her body, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming wave of sheer panic. She looked up at her husband, her eyes wide and pleading. The realization that she was entirely powerless and completely vulnerable finally settled into her bones. She grabbed the lapels of Kendrick's expensive tailored suit, her perfectly manicured fingers digging into the dark fabric. "Kendrick, please," Audrey begged, her voice trembling with genuine pathetic desperation. "I am so sorry. I know I made a massive mistake with the money, but you cannot just leave me here with nothing. Where am I supposed to go tonight? My brother is going to prison. My mother is losing her house. Please take me home with you. I am your wife. I will do whatever you want. I will go to counseling. I will get a job. Just do not abandon me like this." Kendrick looked down at her hands gripping his suit, and then he looked directly into her tear-filled eyes. There was absolutely no love left in his expression. There was only a profound, exhausting emptiness. "You are not my wife anymore," Audrey Kendrick stated coldly, completely devoid of any remaining emotion. "You have spent our entire marriage treating me like an endless ATM. You and your incredibly arrogant mother always looked down on me. You made those quiet, racist comments about my background when you thought I could not hear you. You secretly believed I was somehow beneath your prestigious family, even while I was the only person funding your fraudulent lifestyle. I am done paying for your toxic, manipulative family." Kendrick reached into his suit pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. He calmly opened it, bypassed the thick stack of platinum credit cards, and pulled out a single crumpled $20 bill. He forcefully slapped the piece of paper currency directly into Audrey's trembling palm. "Here is your final allowance," Kendrick said, his deep voice slicing through her remaining dignity. "Call a cheap taxi, go find a cheap motel, and do not ever try to contact my law firm or approach my downtown penthouse again. My security team already has your photograph, and they have strict legal instructions to arrest you for trespassing if you even step foot on the property. Goodbye, Audrey." Kendrick turned his back on her, picked up his heavy leather briefcase, and confidently walked out of the dining room. The heavy front door clicked shut behind him, leaving a suffocating, incredibly heavy silence in his wake. Audrey collapsed onto the Persian rug, clutching the $20 bill to her chest as she sobbed uncontrollably. Sylvia remained frozen on the floor nearby, completely catatonic. I slowly turned my attention away from the ruined women and looked toward the living room sofa. Madison was sitting there entirely alone. Outside the window, the police lights flashed wildly as her father was shoved into the back of a cruiser. The teenage girl slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. Her tear-streaked face was completely pale, and her wide eyes were filled with absolute paralyzing terror as she realized she had absolutely no one left to protect her anymore. The massive, terrifying reality of her dark situation began to completely sink in right now. She was utterly trapped alone tonight. I slowly walked across the thick Persian rug toward the living room sofa. The heavy silence in the room was only broken by the distant sound of police sirens fading into the cold winter night. Madison shrank back against the plush cushions as I approached her. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms tightly around her legs. An hour ago, she was a spoiled, entitled teenager who smirked when her grandmother insulted me. Right now, she was just a terrified 15-year-old girl who had just watched her own father viciously try to destroy her life to save himself. I did not feel any anger toward her anymore. I only felt a deep, familiar ache of recognition. I knew exactly what it felt like to be completely abandoned by the people who were supposed to fiercely protect you. I sat down on the opposite end of the long sofa, leaving enough space so she would not feel physically trapped. Madison squeezed her eyes shut, preparing for me to yell at her. She expected me to ruthlessly punish her for actively participating in the terrible trap. I did not raise my voice. "Your father is a coward, Madison," I said softly, my tone completely calm and surprisingly gentle. "What he did to you in the hallway tonight was absolutely unforgivable. A real parent sacrifices everything to keep their child safe. A real parent never hands their daughter a bag of deadly narcotics and tells her to commit a felony." Madison let out a broken, shuddering gasp. She opened her swollen eyes and looked at me, completely stunned by my lack of hostility. "He promised he would buy me a car," she whispered, her voice cracking with fresh tears. "He said we were going to lose the house if I did not help him get rid of you." "He lied to you," I replied flatly, refusing to sugarcoat the harsh reality. "He was always going to lose this house. He was heavily in debt, and he used you as a desperate, disposable pawn. This entire family is incredibly toxic. They have taught you that love is highly conditional and that money is the only thing that actually matters in this world. But your life is definitely not over tonight. You are only 15 years old. You have plenty of time to build a completely different future for yourself." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, thick, cream-colored business card. I held it out toward her. Madison stared at it, hesitating for a long moment, before slowly reaching out her trembling hand to take it. "That is the direct contact information for the admissions director at an elite private boarding school in upstate New York," I explained, watching her eyes scan the elegant gold lettering on the card. "It is located far away from the toxic influence of this terrible family. They have an incredible academic program, and more importantly, they have excellent private therapists on staff who specialize in severe family trauma. If you want a fresh start, I will personally pay your full tuition. I will cover your room, your board, and your private medical counseling until you graduate high school." Madison gasped sharply, her jaw dropping open in absolute shock. She looked from the expensive business card up to my face, completely unable to comprehend the massive offer. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "I literally just tried to help my dad frame you and send you to federal prison. Because I know what happens to young girls who are left to drown in a broken system." I told her honestly, my brown eyes locking onto hers. "But my incredible financial offer comes with one extremely strict condition, Madison. You are going to accept the legal representation of a court-appointed attorney tomorrow morning. And when the federal prosecutors officially call you to the witness stand during your father's criminal trial, you are going to tell the absolute truth. You are going to publicly testify against him under oath. You will tell the judge exactly how he handed you those drugs and forced you to participate in his pathetic conspiracy." Madison stared down at the small piece of cardboard resting in her shaking palms. She processed the heavy weight of my strict ultimatum. If she stayed here, she had absolutely nothing left. Her grandmother was ruined, her aunt was penniless, and her father had violently betrayed her without a second thought. Her prestigious family had completely abandoned her to save themselves. I was the absolute only adult in her entire life who was offering her a genuine, tangible lifeline tonight. She tightly gripped the business card, looked directly into my eyes, and nodded. I gave Madison a reassuring nod, then stood up from the plush sofa. I turned my attention back to the grand foyer. The reality of the strict countdown clock had finally penetrated the thick skulls of the remaining family members. The massive Connecticut estate suddenly erupted into a pathetic, chaotic frenzy. Sylvia and Audrey were desperately sprinting up the grand mahogany staircase, their expensive high heels clicking frantically against the polished wood. They were abandoning any remaining shred of upper-class dignity. I casually walked over to the bottom of the grand staircase, planting my feet firmly on the bottom step. I opened my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, itemized legal ledger. It was the master asset inventory list compiled directly by the federal bankruptcy court. I stood there quietly listening to the heavy, frantic thuds echoing from the second floor. Drawers were violently ripped open. Closet doors were slammed. I could hear Audrey screeching at her mother to hurry up, frantically demanding empty suitcases. Exactly 20 minutes later, the two women reappeared at the top of the stairs. They looked absolutely ridiculous. Sylvia was dragging two massive Louis Vuitton trunks behind her, her face flushed red with exertion. Audrey was carrying 3 oversized leather duffel bags, her arms strained under the immense weight. They were trying to smuggle out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of luxury items. I watched them clumsily struggle down the carpeted steps, their expensive bags thumping heavily against the wood. "Stop right there," I commanded, my voice slicing effortlessly through their frantic, heavy breathing. Sylvia froze on the middle landing, glaring down at me with absolute venom. "Get out of my way, Stella," Sylvia hissed aggressively. "We packed our personal belongings just like you demanded. We are leaving this miserable house. Now step aside and let us pass." I did not move a single inch. I slowly opened the thick legal ledger in my hands. "I'm afraid there is a massive legal misunderstanding here, Sylvia," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly even and strictly professional. "When your son formally filed for commercial bankruptcy and heavily leveraged this entire estate, he did not just mortgage the physical brick-and-mortar building. He legally listed the entire contents of this property as collateral to secure his massive, fraudulent loans." Audrey dropped one of her heavy duffel bags. It hit the stairs with a loud metallic clanking sound. "What are you talking about?" Audrey demanded, her voice rising in fresh panic. "These are our clothes. These are my personal designer handbags." I pointed directly at the heavy bags they were desperately clinging to. "The federal bankruptcy court has officially laid claim to every luxury asset purchased with those fraudulent corporate funds," I clarified coldly. "That includes the extensive modern art collection hanging in the hallways. That includes the rare vintage wine cellar in the basement. And that absolutely includes the massive collection of diamond jewelry, imported watches, and rare designer handbags you are currently trying to smuggle out in those expensive suitcases. You do not own any of those items anymore. The bank owns them. I am officially confiscating them right now. You are completely insane, Sylvia screamed, her face contorting with ugly, desperate rage. These are my family heirlooms. I am taking them with me. I calmly looked past her, directing my voice toward the two police deputies who were still standing quietly near the front door. Officers, I called out clearly. If these two women attempt to exit my private property, carrying stolen federal banking assets, I will be forced to press immediate felony theft charges against both of them. The taller deputy immediately stepped forward, resting his hand intimidatingly on his utility belt. You need to open those bags and empty them right now, the officer ordered loudly. Sylvia let out a defeated gasp. She looked at the stern police officer, then down at the massive fortune she was desperately trying to steal back. She knew she had completely lost. With shaking hands, she unzipped the heavy trunk. A sparkling avalanche of diamond necklaces, pearl earrings, and expensive gold bracelets spilled out, tumbling uselessly onto the carpeted stairs. Audrey began sobbing hysterically again, dumping her duffel bags. Piles of pristine designer purses and expensive silk scarves fell to the floor, officially stripped away from them forever. They were forced to leave the heavy bags behind on the staircase. Sylvia slowly walked down the remaining steps. She did not look at me. She did not say a single word. She was wearing nothing but the simple dress on her back and a thin winter coat. The once proud matriarch of the prestigious Connecticut dynasty pushed open the heavy front door. She stepped barefoot out into the freezing winter snow, broken and penniless. The heavy oak front door swung shut with a resounding click, sealing the freezing winter wind outside. The loud, chaotic noise that had entirely consumed the massive Connecticut estate suddenly vanished. It was replaced by a profound, echoing silence. I stood perfectly still in the grand foyer, watching through the tall glass side panels as the red and blue lights of the police cruisers pulled out of the driveway. They disappeared down the dark suburban street, taking the corrupted legacy of Bradley and his family with them forever. The house was finally empty. It was just me and my 10-year-old son left standing inside the cavernous mansion. I took a slow, incredibly deep breath, letting the freezing, toxic tension of the evening fully drain out of my tired muscles. I walked back into the living room, my heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood floors. The wreckage of their pathetic, desperate departure was scattered everywhere. The expensive Persian rug was wrinkled from the brief altercation. The mahogany dining table was covered in scattered divorce papers, bankruptcy documents, and half-eaten plates of cold roasted lamb. At the bottom of the grand staircase, a literal mountain of confiscated luxury goods sat abandoned. Sparkling diamond necklaces, thick gold bracelets, and incredibly expensive designer leather bags were piled up like useless trash. It was a perfectly fitting monument to their absolute greed and their staggering arrogance. I looked up at the massive crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling. Despite the millions of dollars poured into the architecture and the interior design, the house felt incredibly cold. It was completely devoid of any genuine warmth or love. It was just a giant hollow museum built to desperately impress strangers and violently intimidate anyone they considered beneath them. I felt a small, warm hand gently slip into mine. I looked down. Leo was standing quietly beside me, his brown eyes scanning the massive, empty room. He had been so incredibly brave and perfectly silent throughout the terrifying ordeal. I knelt down on the expensive rug until I was at his eye level. I pulled him into a tight, fiercely protective hug, burying my face in his shoulder. I breathed in the familiar, comforting scent of his shampoo. "We are completely safe now, Leo," I whispered softly into his ear, making sure he understood the absolute truth of my words. "Nobody is ever going to hurt us or try to take you away from me. I promise you that." Leo hugged me back tightly. He pulled away slightly, looking around the cavernous living room with a critical expression that looked exactly like mine. "Mom," he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet space. "Are we going to live here now? Do I have to sleep in one of those big creepy rooms upstairs?" I could not help it. I let out a genuine, incredibly warm laugh. I reached out and gently smoothed down his messy hair. "Absolutely not, sweetheart," I assured him firmly. "We already have a perfectly wonderful home. Our house is filled with happy memories, comfortable furniture, and love. This place is just a very expensive brick box built on terrible lies and financial fraud. It is not a real home. We are never going to spend a single night sleeping under this roof." Leo looked incredibly relieved. He nodded his head and leaned against my shoulder. "Then what are you going to do with it?" he asked curiously, pointing at the massive sweeping staircase. I stood back up, holding his hand securely in mine. "That is an excellent question," I said, looking around the ostentatious space one final time. "I think this property desperately needs a complete and total transformation to wash away the terrible history." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I swiped across the glowing screen and opened my personal contact list. It was quite late, nearing 10 o'clock at night, but the specific man I was looking for was notoriously known for working around the clock. He was a highly successful commercial real estate developer who specialized in clearing distressed properties and building massive new community projects from the ground up. I tapped his name and raised the phone to my ear, listening to the steady ringing tone. It only took 3 rings before his deep, gravelly voice answered on the other end. "Good evening, David," I said, my voice projecting crisp, absolute authority into the completely empty mansion. "I know it is incredibly late, but I just acquired a massive piece of prime Connecticut real estate tonight. The entire property is completely vacant. I need your best demolition crew out here as soon as legally possible. We are going to permanently tear this massive monstrosity down to the bare dirt." Exactly 2 weeks passed since that chaotic dinner. The harsh Connecticut winter had settled deeply into the wealthy suburban neighborhood. I stood at the end of the long, sweeping driveway, wrapping my sharp black wool coat tightly against the biting morning wind. Kendrick stood casually beside me. He looked incredibly sharp in his dark, tailored overcoat, holding a sleek leather folio. After officially resigning as the legal counsel for his toxic former family members, he had formally offered his highly impressive corporate legal services to my investment firm. Today, he was acting as my personal attorney for the final transfer of the massive property. The incredibly quiet, prestigious street was suddenly interrupted by the loud, heavy grinding of diesel engines. I watched with immense satisfaction as 3 massive yellow bulldozers slowly turned off the main road and crawled up the pristine driveway. Their heavy metal tracks completely crushed the perfectly manicured front lawn. David, the commercial developer, had moved with unprecedented speed. The massive demolition permits were fully approved, and the complete destruction of the fraudulent legacy was officially scheduled to begin this morning. Kendrick opened his leather folio and handed me a thick stack of finalized legal documents. "The property title is officially clear, Stella," he confirmed, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute professional satisfaction. "The bank has been fully compensated, and the deed is entirely in your name. You can give the demolition crew the green light whenever you are ready." I reached into my pocket for my favorite fountain pen. Before I could sign the final transfer paper, a completely beaten-down, rusted sedan violently sputtered down the quiet street and abruptly pulled over near the estate entrance. The passenger doors groaned open. Sylvia and Audrey stumbled out onto the freezing pavement. They looked absolutely unrecognizable. The expensive designer gowns and flawless blowouts were completely gone. They were wearing cheap wrinkled sweatpants and faded winter jackets. I knew from Kendrick that they had been desperately living in a cheap, rundown motel on the absolute outskirts of the city, rapidly burning through the last of Audrey's meager cash allowance. They had clearly come back this morning to completely abandon their pride once again. They were hoping to catch me at the property, desperately planning to beg for their luxurious house back. But their pathetic apologies completely died in their throats the absolute second they saw the massive yellow bulldozers idling heavily on their precious front lawn. Sylvia let out a horrified, breathless gasp. She ran forward, her worn shoes slipping on the icy driveway. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, waving her arms frantically at the construction workers. "Stop those machines right now. You cannot destroy my house. This is my family home." Audrey ran up right behind her, her eyes wide with absolute unadulterated panic. "Stella, please." Audrey begged, tears instantly freezing on her pale cheeks. "We have absolutely nowhere else to go. The motel is kicking us out tomorrow morning. We are completely broke. Please, just let us move back into the guest house. We will do anything you want." I calmly signed my name at the bottom of the final legal document and handed the thick clipboard back to Kendrick. I slowly walked toward the two desperate women, stopping just a few feet away from them. "You are both completely delusional," I stated coldly, looking at their pathetic, ruined faces. "You do not have a family home anymore. You lost this property the exact moment you decided to use it as a staging ground for a federal narcotics conspiracy against my innocent child. This massive brick monstrosity is coming down today." Sylvia fell to her knees on the frozen driveway, openly sobbing, as a heavy bulldozer slowly raised its massive metal claw toward the grand front columns of the mansion. "Why are you doing this?" Sylvia cried out, completely shattered. "Why would you destroy a perfectly good $10 million mansion just to be incredibly spiteful?" "I am not doing this out of spite, Sylvia," I replied, my voice ringing clear and incredibly steady over the loud diesel engines. "I am doing this to correct a massive injustice. I just officially sold this entire parcel of land to a large nonprofit commercial developer. This highly exclusive, wealthy neighborhood is about to get a massive reality check. Once your ridiculous mansion is completely leveled, this land will be entirely redeveloped into a brand new, highly subsidized, affordable housing complex." I looked down at Sylvia's horrified face, delivering the absolute final blow. "It is specifically designed to provide safe, warm, and entirely free apartments for aged-out foster youth who have absolutely nowhere else to go. They will finally have a beautiful, safe home here. You will never step foot on this quiet street again." 9 months later, the freezing winter snow had completely melted into a bright, crisp autumn morning. I sat quietly in the second row of the heavy wooden gallery inside the federal courthouse downtown. The massive courtroom was completely silent, filled with an incredibly tense, heavy atmosphere. I wore a sharp-tailored navy blue suit, projecting absolute calm and professional authority. Sitting directly next to me was Kendrick, completely stoic and highly observant, as usual. We were both here to witness the absolute final chapter of this incredible saga. The heavy wooden side door next to the judge's bench swung open with a loud creak. A highly armed federal marshal walked into the courtroom leading a completely defeated man by a thick steel chain wrapped securely around his waist. It was Bradley, the incredibly arrogant, wealthy tech executive who had viciously tried to destroy my life, was entirely gone. He was wearing an oversized, incredibly bright orange prison jumpsuit. His expensive Italian suits were replaced by cheap, scratchy canvas. His perfectly styled hair was severely overgrown and completely unkempt. He looked incredibly pale, gaunt, and absolutely exhausted. The heavy steel handcuffs clinked loudly against his waist chain as he slowly shuffled toward the defense table. He did not look like a mastermind anymore. He looked exactly like the pathetic, cowardly criminal he truly was. He sat down heavily in his wooden chair, completely refusing to look back at the gallery where I was sitting. The federal prosecutor formally called their absolute star witness to the stand. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Madison walked down the center aisle. I felt an incredible surge of pride watching her. The terrified, sobbing teenager from that horrible dinner party had completely transformed. After 9 months at the elite upstate boarding school and intensive private therapy, she looked incredibly healthy, remarkably calm, and fiercely determined. She wore a simple, conservative gray dress. She confidently took the witness stand, placed her right hand on the Bible, and firmly swore to tell the absolute whole truth. The prosecutor asked Madison to carefully recount the specific events of that terrible evening. Bradley finally looked up, his hollow eyes locking onto his teenage daughter, silently begging her to protect him. Madison did not flinch. She looked directly at the federal judge and spoke with incredible clarity. She confidently described how her father pulled her aside in the front hallway. She testified exactly how he forcefully handed her the small plastic bag of fentanyl. She repeated his cruel, incredibly desperate instructions to hide the deadly narcotics inside my 10-year-old son's denim jacket. She clearly explained his ruthless master plan to have me falsely arrested so he could legally steal my multi-million-dollar trust fund to save his fraudulent, bankrupt company. Every single word Madison spoke echoed loudly in the silent courtroom, driving a massive, undeniable nail directly into her father's legal coffin. The defense attorney did not even bother to cross-examine her. The undeniable combination of Madison's brave testimony, the incredibly damning home security video I had personally provided, and the massive mountain of federal bankruptcy fraud documents left absolutely zero room for any reasonable doubt. Madison stepped down from the witness stand, gave me a small, brave smile, and walked out of the courtroom to wait in the private lobby. The federal judge struck his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block. The loud crack signaled the absolute end of the line. The judge stared down at Bradley with profound, undeniable disgust. The judge clearly stated that attempting to weaponize the legal system, actively endangering a minor, and committing massive federal bank fraud were absolutely unforgivable crimes. The judge firmly sentenced Bradley to exactly 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The judge explicitly stated there would be absolutely no possibility of early parole. Bradley completely collapsed forward, slamming his head against the heavy wooden defense table as he began to loudly sob. The federal marshals immediately stepped forward. They grabbed Bradley by his orange shoulders and forcefully hauled him up onto his feet. They aggressively spun him around to march him toward the heavy side door, leading directly to the holding cells. As he slowly shuffled past the wooden gallery railing, he finally raised his tear-stained face and locked his hollow eyes directly onto mine. I did not smile. I did not say a single word of triumph. I simply raised my left arm, rolled back my navy blue suit sleeve, and slowly, deliberately tapped the glowing digital face of my Apple Watch with my right index finger. It was the exact same watch I had used to secretly record his vicious gaslighting in the study 9 months ago. Bradley let out a heavy, defeated gasp. I turned my back on Bradley and walked out of the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. The bright autumn sun was shining brilliantly over the city skyline, cutting through the crisp air. I took a deep breath, feeling an immense, undeniable weight permanently lift off my shoulders. Kendrick walked out right beside me, holding his leather briefcase. Madison was waiting for us on the courthouse steps, talking animatedly with my son Leo. I had arranged for Leo to miss his morning classes, so we could all have a special celebratory lunch together after the sentencing was finalized. We walked 2 blocks down the busy city street to an upscale Italian restaurant. The atmosphere inside was warm, inviting, and completely filled with the comforting smell of roasted garlic and fresh bread. It was the exact opposite of that cold, incredibly toxic dining room in Connecticut 9 months ago. The host seated the 4 of us at a large, comfortable booth in the back corner. As we settled into our seats and ordered our meals, the heavy tension of the morning completely evaporated. Kendrick took a sip of his sparkling water and leaned back against the leather cushion. He looked more relaxed than I had ever seen him. The heavy burden of carrying that parasitic family had been completely washed away. You will be quite interested to know that I received an incredibly pathetic email from Audrey last week. Kendrick casually mentioned resting his arms on the table. I raised an eyebrow, taking a piece of warm bread from the basket. What did she want this time, I asked. She was desperately begging me to co-sign a lease for a cheap studio apartment on the edge of town. Kendrick explained, a small, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Her credit score is completely destroyed. It is sitting somewhere in the low 400s. No respectable landlord will even look at her application. She is currently working a minimum wage retail job folding sweaters at a discount clothing outlet in the local mall. She completely lost the cheap motel room last month when she maxed out her final predatory payday loan. And Sylvia, I asked, feeling absolutely no pity for the ruined matriarch. Sylvia is currently living in the spare bedroom of a distant cousin who absolutely despises her, Kendrick replied smoothly. She spends all of her time bitterly complaining to anyone who will listen about how her brilliant son was unfairly targeted by a vicious corporate conspiracy. But absolutely no one in her old country club circle takes her calls anymore. They have been completely exiled from polite society. I nodded, entirely satisfied with the cosmic justice of their situation. I turned my attention to Madison, who was happily sharing a plate of calamari with Leo. She looked incredibly radiant. The dark, heavy bags under her eyes were completely gone. Her posture was straight, and she carried herself with a brand new, quiet confidence. "How are your classes going upstate, Madison?" I asked her warmly. Madison beamed, reaching into her canvas tote bag. She pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope and handed it across the table to me. "I got my midterm report card yesterday," she announced proudly. "I wanted you to be the very first person to see it." I opened the envelope and scanned the thick premium paper. It was a completely flawless academic record. She had straight A grades in every single advanced placement class, glowing remarks from her private therapist, and a special commendation for joining the varsity debate team. I felt a massive surge of genuine pride. I looked up and gave her a warm, incredibly bright smile. "This is absolutely incredible, Madison," I told her honestly. "You have worked so incredibly hard this year. You completely turned your entire life around." "I could not have done it without you," Stella Madison replied, her voice filled with deep, undeniable gratitude. "You were the only person who actually believed I could be something better than what my family wanted me to be." The waiter arrived, placing our heavy plates of fresh pasta on the table. Kendrick picked up his glass of sparkling water and raised it high in the center of the booth. I picked up my glass, and Madison and Leo quickly followed his lead. "I think we need a proper toast," Kendrick announced, his deep voice carrying a genuine warmth that was entirely absent during his marriage. "To completely cutting out toxic bloodlines, and to the beautiful, incredibly strong chosen family we have built right here at this table." "To chosen family," we all echoed in unison. Our glasses clinked loudly together, ringing with the bright, undeniably sweet sound of absolute freedom as we finally looked forward to a very peaceful future. Later that evening, the bright energy of our celebratory lunch settled into a quiet, comforting calm. I unlocked the front door of my house and stepped inside, taking a deep breath of the familiar air. My home was located in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood. It did not have sweeping marble staircases, crystal chandeliers, or a grand mahogany coat rack in the foyer. Instead, it had warm oak floors, walls covered in framed photographs of genuine smiles, and a comfortable living room that actually felt like a place meant for living. Every single piece of furniture, every rug, and every brick of this house was completely paid for by my own hard work. There were no hidden mortgages and absolutely no toxic bank loans attached to our sanctuary. I walked down the short hallway and gently pushed open the door to Leo's bedroom. The soft glow of his star-shaped nightlight illuminated the room. He was already tucked under his heavy quilt, his favorite stuffed bear resting next to his pillow. I sat down on the edge of his mattress, brushing a stray lock of hair away from his forehead. His eyes were heavy with sleep, but he fought to keep them open just a little bit longer. "Mom," Leo whispered, his voice incredibly soft in the quiet room. "Are we really safe now? Is that bad man ever going to come back and try to take me away?" I leaned down and kissed his forehead, letting my lips linger for a moment, to transfer every ounce of absolute certainty I possessed. "We are completely safe, Leo," I assured him, my voice steady and unwavering. "He is locked away in a place where he can never reach us again. Nobody is ever going to take you away from me. You never have to worry about those terrible people for the rest of your life. I will always protect you." Leo let out a long, contented sigh. His small muscles entirely relaxed, and within minutes, his deep, rhythmic breathing told me he was fast asleep. I sat there in the dim light for a long time, just watching his chest rise and fall. The fierce, undeniable love I felt for my son was the exact compass that had guided me through this entire nightmare. I quietly slipped out of his room, pulling the door partially shut, and walked into my modest kitchen. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and stood by the sink, looking out the window into our small, fenced backyard. The moonlight cast long, peaceful shadows across the grass. Standing there in the quiet comfort of my own kitchen, the sheer magnitude of the last 9 months finally washed over me. My mind drifted back to the terrified 7-year-old girl I used to be standing on a freezing porch with my entire life stuffed into a thin black trash bag. The foster care system had taught me early on that the world was incredibly cruel, highly unpredictable, and heavily rigged in favor of people who already had wealth and power. People like Sylvia and Bradley had always viewed people like me as completely disposable. They looked at my background and saw an easy target. They saw a desperate, vulnerable orphan they could easily manipulate and destroy to save their own crumbling empire. But they made one catastrophic miscalculation. They failed to realize that surviving the absolute bottom of society makes you incredibly resilient. I did not have generational wealth to fall back on, so I built my own fortress out of raw intellect, relentless discipline, and financial literacy. I did not fight their massive, corrupt dynasty with physical violence or loud, hysterical screaming. I completely dismantled their entire arrogant family, using nothing but a glowing tablet, a digital spreadsheet, and my comprehensive understanding of federal banking regulations. They thought their prestigious last name and their expensive zip code made them completely untouchable. I proved that true power does not come from the illusion of inherited wealth. True power comes from knowing exactly who you are, understanding the absolute value of your own hard work, and refusing to let anyone leverage your past trauma against you. I took the absolute worst nightmare they could throw at me, and I turned it into the exact weapon that legally destroyed them. I took a slow sip of my warm tea, feeling a profound, undeniable sense of permanent closure. The long, exhausting chapter of fighting Bradley and his toxic family was officially closed forever. My son was safely asleep in the next room. My career was thriving, and my chosen family was incredibly strong. I turned away from the kitchen window and walked slowly into the living room, feeling an overwhelming desire to share this exact realization with you today. If you are listening to my story right now, I want you to understand something incredibly important about the people who try to use your personal history against you. Society often tells us that coming from a broken home or surviving a difficult childhood is a permanent disadvantage. People like Sylvia and Bradley operate under the arrogant assumption that those of us who grew up without safety nets are inherently weak. They believe that because we did not inherit trust funds or prestigious family names, we are desperate for their validation. They use their wealth and their status as weapons, assuming we will quietly bow down just to sit at their expensive tables. But they are completely wrong. Your background does not define your absolute value. Growing up in the foster system did not make me defective. It made me incredibly observant. It taught me how to quickly read the hidden intentions behind fake smiles. It forced me to understand that the only person who will ever truly rescue you is yourself. When you have to build your entire life from absolute scratch, you learn the structural integrity of every single brick you lay. You learn to value hard work, discipline, and uncompromising self-respect. That is exactly why financial independence is so absolutely crucial. Money is not just about buying expensive things or living in massive mansions. As you saw with Bradley and his family, wealth built on fraud and leverage is just a gilded cage. True financial independence is about having the ultimate freedom to walk away from toxic situations. It is about having the resources to look a corrupt police chief in the eye and absolutely refuse to back down. It is about knowing that no one can ever force you into a corner because you control your own escape route. I urge you to fiercely protect your financial autonomy. Build your own safety net, no matter how small it starts. Never let anyone convince you that you need to rely on their money, because toxic people will always attach incredibly heavy chains to their financial support. Setting firm boundaries is always the next critical step. For a very long time, I thought I had to be perfectly accommodating to be loved. I thought if I just worked hard enough and smiled bright enough, people from privileged backgrounds would finally accept me as their equal. But you cannot negotiate with people who fundamentally disrespect you. You have to draw a hard, permanent line in the sand. When someone shows you they are willing to sacrifice your well-being for their own selfish gain, you must believe them the very first time. You do not owe anyone your absolute loyalty just because they demand it. You certainly do not owe them your peace of mind. Look at Kendrick and Madison. They both realized that sharing a bloodline with someone does not give that person a permanent free pass to destroy your life. They chose to break the cycle of generational abuse. They chose to walk away from the incredibly toxic expectations of their relatives and build a brand new path. We all have the incredible power to choose our family. We can actively surround ourselves with people who celebrate our victories, respect our firm boundaries, and genuinely love us for exactly who we are. The family that tried to destroy me completely underestimated the incredible strength it takes to survive the darkest corners of this world. They looked at my foster care records and saw a vulnerability they could easily exploit. They thought my past made me an easy target. They didn't realize it made me bulletproof. I want you to carry that exact same armor with you every single day. Do not ever let anyone make you feel small because of where you came from. Do not let them leverage your deepest fears against you. The next time someone attempts to use your history as a weapon to completely control your future, I want you to look them directly in the eye and absolutely refuse to surrender your power. When they try to build a cage around you, use your intellect and your resilience to completely dismantle it from the inside out. You have survived entirely too much heartbreak to let incredibly arrogant people dictate your ultimate worth. Your independence is your greatest masterpiece, and you must protect it fiercely. Have you ever had a toxic family member try to trap you, only to fall into a trap of their own making? Tell me how you outsmarted them in the comments below. And if this story brought you satisfaction, hit that subscribe button. Because true wealth isn't what's in your bank account, it's the peace of mind, knowing you can't be bought and you can't be broken. The most profound takeaway from Stella's harrowing ordeal is that true security is never inherited or magically gifted. It is meticulously built through self-reliance, firm personal boundaries, and absolute financial independence. Society often conditions us to believe that marrying into wealth or gaining the approval of a prestigious family is the ultimate safety net. However, as Stella's journey vividly illustrates, when you rely on the resources of highly toxic people, those resources inevitably become the heavy chains they use to control and manipulate your entire life. Bradley and his elitist family possessed all the external markers of success: a sprawling Connecticut estate, designer clothing, and powerful local connections. Yet their entire foundation was hollow, built solely on deceit, desperate debt, and leverage. They arrogantly assumed Stella's traumatic background in the foster system made her incredibly weak and desperate for their validation. Instead, her difficult past forged an unbreakable resilience. Because Stella had spent years mastering her demanding profession as a forensic accountant and building her own self-funded life, she was completely immune to their vicious tactics. She did not need their money or their fake status, which meant she simply could not be bought, intimidated, or forced into blind submission. This gripping story serves as a powerful reminder that our greatest defense against emotional and financial manipulation is our own absolute autonomy. Financial literacy, strong boundaries, and a deeply rooted sense of self-worth are the most effective weapons against those who seek to exploit our vulnerabilities. You do not need to come from a legacy of wealth to be incredibly powerful. By investing in your own tangible skills and refusing to compromise your core values for the sake of toxic acceptance, you create a bulletproof life that no one can ever dismantle. Please share your own strategies for building financial and emotional independence in the comments below, and hit subscribe for more empowering content.